Our last talk will be on Ethics Toolkit by Knoppers, or Bartha Knoppers, sorry.
Good morning, everyone. Before I begin, for those of you in the audience who are legally averse, there is a tool, or a GDPR adverse. There is a tool on the Global Alliance for Genomics and Health website, that's a GA4GH. It's called the GA4GH GDPR Forum, and you can ask a question. There's a team, and every month there's a 400-word answer in ordinary English. So your question about European citizenry would fit perfectly into the kind of queries that you may have concerning the GDPR, before I forget. So on behalf of the Ethics Working Group, you can see here I am accompanied by two chairs, both Barbara and Roderick, and ably supported by Emily Kirby, who is the coordinator of the Ethics Working Group. A brief outline of the topics, hopefully, that I'll be able to address in this short time. And let's start with the fact that we finally got to meet. I don't know about you, but Zoom and everything finally just does not make a committee work. You have to meet, understand each other as people, be able to communicate and address issues in a more personal and professional way. So we did get to meet thanks to the welcome at the in London, and started to work on the toolkit. Now, the whole group, I can say this, has a common philosophy. Ethics is not there to prevent. It's there to provide flexible, harmonizable, interoperable tools to facilitate and encourage data sharing, because it's too easy to stay in the silos and hide behind legal or ethical excuses. So the first thing we did, even before we met in London in our center of, we are supported at the Center of Genomics and Policy at McGill, we put up primers per tissue. We started with primers, for instance, on fetal and embryonic tissue across 7 countries. That sort of represented a typology of different kinds of approaches. We also did deceased, what you can or cannot. By the way, there are different attitudes even and laws and even in Europe concerning deceased tissues. So we did these primers, and then we put them together into one issues with tissues document, which is available, whereby what kind of consent do you need and so on. We regrouped them again into something that we hope is a usable document, and we have charts in there by country, by types of consent and so on, that simplify what often looks like a myriad of complex and confusing ethical legal approaches. An absence of law, as you know, does not mean that there isn't a policy or a guideline, whether local, national, regional, or for some jurisdictions who use international instruments. So go to the website. We're ready. I'll show you some of the things we did yesterday. We met again, and starting to provide guidance for the whole HCA community in terms of the tools that you need, the templates that you might want to borrow from and adapt and customize to your projects, to your tissue type, and to your country. So a little bit ahead of time, it says here live in 2020, but actually it's alive as of, let's say, Monday when I get back to Montreal. The Ethics Help Desk is also open for queries. Now, we're not allowed to give legal opinions on the Ethics Help Desk, but obviously any queries that you have where you don't find even the beginning of a response or a satisfactory response on the website, please do not hesitate to contact us. And we can also help you with respect to the application of the ethics toolkits and the different tools. Now, what we are concluding on in the next 3-4 days or so are the core consent elements. moving forward, if you could prospectively design in your next research application, your next project, and the consents that your ethics committee will ask you to prepare, how can you maximize or optimize the kind of data sharing that is necessary for the Human Cell Atlas to be a true atlas and yet meet the different requirements in an interoperable way between the different countries and across the tissue types. So this is a core consent elements. And in fact, what we would like as an ethics committee is that you say to your ethics committee, look, this is the HCA. If these core elements are not in, we cannot combine from the African continent with the South American continents and so North America and Europe. This is necessary for the atlas to work. They have to understand that there's science here, and you can't go playing around with your favorite little words and sentences and commas and so on, as you might want to do in other cases. And so we suggested that these core minimal elements be included as you move forward prospectively and as you prepare your protocols and your funding applications. Now, currently, we're still promoting and preparing the core consent elements for the open access. Still believe that such a tool and such a way of sharing data should remain possible. I was part of the HapMap, I was part of the 1000 Genomes Project, and I can't tell you how wonderful it is, I guess is the only word, to be able to provide open access tools to anyone in the world who wants to have access to them. We should not give up just because there's some hypothetical one day somewhere, somehow, someone may be re-identified. We don't build policy on hypotheticals or on bad cases, such as the Snowden, or Cambridge Analytica. Bad cases make bad law. We must move forward in convincing policymakers and that these are fundamental research tools and are necessary for a humanistic international approach to science. And we do realize, however, that most data, especially increasing clinical data, would be still under a managed, sometimes called restricted, sometimes called controlled access tier. So looking at these core consent elements, and we even further simplified some of them yesterday. If you're going to go for an open access, what do you need to say? What would anyone from any scientist from any country need to include? I don't have time to go through the elements here. We simplified some of them yesterday, but there are like 6, if you don't have these 6 things, you won't be able to contribute to an open access project. And what are the kind of warnings that you might have to make sure that participants understand as well. Now, you could also have a managed access. You could have tissues and cells that some would fall under the open access because they're so basic and would not constitute identifiable data. But there would be data, particularly from vulnerable, pediatric or indigenous communities or clinical data that's more likely to be identifiable, that would go through a managed access tier, meaning that there would be an approval process, usually currently through a data access committee. We recommended that for the HCA, that when the HCA finds its home and its location and its platform, that there be a centralized managed access system to avoid forum shopping and to avoid contradictory and confusing decisions of different data access committees around the world. And this can be done. The International Cancer Genome Consortium has long used a centralized data access system with a 5-day turnaround. But what we are looking at, and this is together with the Global Alliance for Genomics and Health, is to build a more rapid registered access for data that is not sensitive, yet is not in the open access tier. And this is what's called registered access. The GA4GH, together with Elixir, is looking at how to set up such an online system. So you wouldn't have a DACO. What you would have is an authentication process. Are you really a bona fide researcher? 2, will you attest, we call it the AAA test, will you attest, i.e. attester in French, or declare that you will not do X, Y, Z, and you will A, B, C respect 6 or 7 conditions. So that's the authentication. It's beyond the ORCID ID. It's like a researcher bona fide status that you can use. Then you attest to what you will or will not do, and then you are authorized. And all of this would be online. So this is a system that we're intermediary between managed and open that we're working on. In terms of, these are more detailed. You can see some of the conditions here: security, confidentiality, competence, and so on. So what are the next steps? Well, we want to get it out. We probably, if Emily, and as I think probably by next week, because we tweaked a few things yesterday in our meeting. We want to prepare tools for pediatric, so in other words, specific tools for different kinds of tissues as well. And most importantly, what people have been asking for is, what do we do with the stuff we already have that we didn't have these minimal core consent elements? Is all this lost, wasted? Can we still use it? How can we share it? So looking at what we call legacy data sets or legacy tissues, what are the different steps that we could use to be able to use such data or samples, and under what conditions? So that's probably within a month, we'll have that retrospective legacy filter available. Once these tools are out, we'll give everyone about a half a year or so to play with them, complain about them, reconfigure them, and please let us know if you find new issues or new questions, and then survey the community to see how helpful they are. And obviously, the ethics help desk will be an ongoing, if you like, survey of the adequacies or inadequacies of our ethics tools. Now, yesterday we heard about how weighty and how heavy and Atlas was, and how much, what the burden an Atlas is. And I think if there's one thing that the ethics working group, and we're a big group, hopefully representative group, working closely with the equity group in terms of their equity in action and the kinds of tools that they will need as they go around the world. What we want to do is lessen that burden, not increase it. And so we need to know what your needs are, what your concerns are, and then we can facilitate so that Atlas is really, the burden is shared throughout the HCA. Thank you.
We have time for a few questions.
It was a very nice presentation. I was wondering if there's any guidance either from the ethics group or other working groups on how we can best consider not just the national and international policies and data sharing, but also elements like institutional policies on intellectual property as well, which is another element which I guess hasn't been touched on so far this morning.
Yeah. I'm very much an open science person, so how do you translate, which by the way are funders, like the European Commission and so on, and even the Canadian government is moving towards open science. How can you foster an open science in a realistic way and still, have this, potential future IP grab mentality, which universities have their own tech transfer offices who are on your back all the time to start startups and do this and patent this. Once you put in a patent claim, you effectively close off. Even if you're never successful in getting your patent, you actually have stopped other scientists from working in that field. So you can reassure your patent offices that basic preemptive, pre-competitive science is not patentable anyway, because we've seen in the myriad case in the United States, that's the BRCA, the cancer case, that what exists in nature and so on is not an invention. It's there. You found it. So what? It's there. And it should be shared because it's in nature. So we need to work on our IP people to understand that open science is not the inimical to patents. It's simply a preliminary step, and that after that, everyone can go and start inventing based on our science.
Yeah, I think a guiding document similar to the ones that you're preparing on that would be incredibly helpful for us to...
Yeah. I must say in the GA4GH meeting, which will be in Boston in 10 days or so, I think, we'll start working on the IP issues, the licensing issues, the copyright issues, the publication issues. We're coming out with policies. And GA4GH, as you know, Global Alliance for Genomics and Health, is a tool-making collaboratory, if I can call it that, and those issues will be addressed in hopefully helpful ways.
I just want to comment on this, that HCA itself has no IP-related standing. And as a result, you as a grantee, anyone here as a grantee of an organization, as an employee of an organization, can have many different constraints and things binding them. Those are not things in which we actually engage as an organization. And it's going to remain that way, partly because it's not solvable in any other way. So when you when a granting agency or a funder makes you a grant, they might come with some restrictions. When you actually signed up for your job, regardless of whether you're a professor or a student, you signed off on something related to that. And those rules are not for us to engage in. What we do say, I think loudly and clearly, is that the data is open. Of course, there could be things that have to do with ethical and legal regulations that make the data more or less controlled access, but it's open in that sense, and that our tools are open source with, appropriate open source licenses. I think after, and we share our protocols openly. Yeah. I think after that, what kinds of derivative inventions you could make for things you found from your study, they're not really.
Yeah. Yeah, and the open source tools are what J4J is building. Irony of ironies, open source, you put your tool out there, right? And then someone somewhere plays with a few little aspects of it, tinkers around, and suddenly you find that you have to get a license to use your own tool, which has been slightly converted. It's what's called predatory conversion. Now, GA4GH is addressing this as well, because we're not going to produce open source tools and then have them slightly modified to become, then we have to pay to use our own tools. It's incredible. So sometimes patents actually help you, if you get them fast, to put stuff in the public domain. And then, so that's what's called protective patenting, just like there's predatory conversion. You learn all this stuff. It's not my field, but we're certainly addressing it because it does stymie the whole idea of data sharing.
Terrific. I think we're going to have to bring this session to a close. I'm sorry, we're out of time. We could follow up offline, perhaps?
Yeah,
So-
I think we need to cut session. We'll take a very quick 10, 15-minute break and then come back at 11:05.